a werewolf shifter romance audiobook written by Jane. Prologue. The memory of the screams still haunted Kaelen Thorne, a phantom echo in the silence of the Blackwood forest. They were the last sounds of his pack, the final wrenching cries as the brutal, unforeseen attack tore through them years ago. He was Alpha then, young and untested, carved from granite but with a heart still too open, too trusting. He remembered the blinding fury, the desperate, futile fight to protect his people. He remembered the blood on his fur, the metallic tang in the air, the cold despair as life drained from his family. Even so, when the dust settled, only scattered remnants remained, a handful of survivors, broken and grieving, and a territory scarred beyond recognition. He had failed. That belief, cold and unyielding, had become a part of him, a brand on his soul. It had hardened his eyes, hunched his shoulders, and convinced him that ruthlessness was the only way to lead a pack brought to its knees. Because how else could he survive? How else could he protect what little remained when he had failed so spectacularly before? He patrolled alone now, a solitary shadowed wolf, listening to the desperate snarls of his remaining rogue wolves as they preyed on the weak, asserting their dwindling power over vulnerable humans. A grim, twisted reflection of what the Blackwood pack once was. But then, an unexpected scent drifted on the wind, fragile and human, yet infused with a strange, undeniable pull that defied logic. It was a faint, insistent thread, drawing him towards the edge of his territory, towards a dilapidated cottage and a young woman named Elara Vance. She was a spark of defiance in a world of shadows, a victim of the very wolves he was supposed to protect. And just like that, a cruel irony twisted his scarred heart. The woman his soul recognized as his fated mate was the one his fractured pack relentlessly tormented. This new connection, this undeniable bond, promised either his final redemption or the complete annihilation of everything he had left. His past failures warned him away, but his instincts screamed to protect. The ancient whispers of a fated destiny had chosen the most impossible mate, forcing him to confront not only his enemies but the very depths of his own brokenness. Could he defy the past, or was he doomed to repeat it? The answer lay hidden in the shadowed heart of the Blackwood, where a struggling alpha would meet his bullied mate. The scent of rust and decay clung to the air, thick and cloying, a constant reminder of what Kaelen Thorne had lost. Moonlight, cold and unforgiving, spilled through the skeletal canopy of the Blackwood forest, striping the desolate ground of his pack's compound. His fur, a deep shadowed black, blended seamlessly with the night. Only his eyes, glowing embers in the darkness, hinted at the powerful, broken creature within. He moved like a ghost, a silent predator. Yet his every step echoed with the weight of the past. He paused near the remains of what was once the vibrant training ground, now just a muddy pit. Twisted metal poles lay scattered, concrete crumbling, a testament to the brutal, unforeseen attack that had nearly annihilated his pack years ago. Kaelen remembered the shouts, the blood, the sheer helplessness. The memory clawed at his throat, a constant, physical ache. He shifted back, the bones grinding as his form rippled and condensed, muscle and sinew reforming into human flesh. Still, the phantom scent of fear and death clung to him. His fingers, calloused and scarred, traced a familiar symbol carved into a moss-covered stone. A jagged claw mark, the Blackwood emblem, now chipped and faded. It felt like a gravestone, because his pack, once formidable, was now just a whisper. Meanwhile, the distant, unsettling snarls of his rogue wolves drifted on the wind. They were out there again, hunting, preying on the weak. Humans. Kaelen's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He could hear the low, guttural laughs, followed by something sharper, a terrified human scream that tore through the quiet night. His instincts screamed at him to intervene, to remind them of the laws of the respect they once held. But then, the weariness settled deep in his bones, because what was the point? His authority was a joke. His pack, shattered and desperate, saw him as weak because he sympathized with humans. That's why he turned away, a heavy cloak of self-loathing wrapping around him, heading deeper into the compound's decay. He was isolated, burdened by the knowledge that he was a perceived failure in the eyes of his pack, perhaps even in the eyes of the old spirits that watched over these woods. Truth be told, he believed it himself. Even so, the human scream seemed to follow him, a high-pitched echo that snagged on the ragged edges of his soul because some part of him buried deep still remembered honor. What kind of alpha allowed this? What kind of monster was he becoming? He didn't know what scared him more, the feral chaos of his pack or the chilling silence of his own resignation. The distant, unnerving sounds of their aggressive laughter, now closer, abruptly cut short by a final, desperate human scream. The rusted gate groaned in protest, a mournful cry that grated on Elara Vance's nerves as she pushed it open. Her new beginning. After that, the dilapidated cottage loomed, sagged at the roofline like an old woman too tired to stand upright. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak sunlight filtering through the grimy windows, a million tiny, hopeful particles against the pervasive gloom within. She stepped inside, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten dreams. This was it, her inheritance, her fresh start. However, a strange warmth emanated from an old, brittle photo album she found tucked away in a cobwebbed cupboard. Its pages showed faint, unfamiliar faces, smiling. Who were they? Her family, perhaps, finally. Her fingers trembled as she turned to a worn journal, its leather cover cracked with age. Cryptic symbols like ancient runes adorned its pages, interspersed with sketches of plants she didn't recognize. A flicker of curiosity cut through her apprehension. Maybe answers waited here, because she was tired of feeling lost. Yet outside, a long, drawn-out howl drifted from the surrounding blackwood forest, followed by a chorus of fainter, unsettling responses. Elara shivered, drawing the threadbare curtains across the grimy panes, because the sounds made the hair on her arms stand on end. She dismissed them quickly, trying to reason away the primal fear. Just wild animals, she told herself, repeating the mantra until it almost felt true. Her goal, to carve out a quiet, safe life, to make this lonely, forgotten house a home. She poured herself a glass of water, trying to focus on the mundane, on scrubbing away the layers of grime. But then, a sudden, deafening bang rattled her front door, making her jump, sending the glass crashing to the floor. Splinters of wood sprayed inward. Snarls, rough and guttural, mingled with mocking laughter from outside. Elara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her heart hammered a desperate rhythm against her ribs. What fresh hell was this? Who could be out there? The flimsy door bowed inward again with another splintering crack, because whatever was out there they weren't asking politely. Elara stumbled backward, her gaze fixed on the menacing figures that filled her porch. 3 men, but not quite. Their eyes, glinting with predatory intent, held a wildness that chilled her to the bone. Their clothing was unkempt, their faces hardened, a chilling reflection of the Blackwood Pack's decay. One, a hulking brute with a scarred lip, stepped forward, his shadow engulfing her small frame. "Tribute," he growled, the word thick with menace, a demand, not a request. "Food, valuables, or we take what we want." In fact, before she could even process their words, they pushed past her, invading her sanctuary. The stench of unwashed bodies and damp earth filled the air, acrid and suffocating. Another, leaner wolf with cruel eyes, snatched the old photo album from the table where she'd left it. He tore a page from it, the brittle paper ripping with a sound that mirrored the tear in her chest. A precious, unfamiliar memory, gone. Her hands clenched. "Leave it," she cried, her voice trembling but with a surprising edge of defiance because her past, however unknown, was still hers. Not only that, they laughed, a guttural, derisive sound that echoed through the small cottage. mocking her isolation, her vulnerability. "Alone, little human," the hulking one sneered, his eyes gleaming. "Unprotected? What a tasty treat." He shoved a small, rickety table, sending a ceramic vase crashing to the floor, its pieces scattering like shattered hopes. Elara, despite the terror coiling in her gut, clutched a broken broom handle, holding it defensively. Her fear was palpable, a cold sweat dampening her skin, yet a spark of unyielding defiance burned in her eyes. She wouldn't break. She wouldn't. Eventually, they seemed to tire of their game. With one final cruel warning, a promise to return, they lumbered off, their heavy boots thudding on the soft earth. The quiet that followed was almost worse than the noise, because it left her with the echoes of their threats. Elara sank to the dusty floor, the broom handle clattering beside her. Tears streamed down her face, hot and stinging, because the reality of her isolation, her constant torment, was suffocating. She was a target. She was truly alone. Still, as her hand brushed against the ancient journal lying forgotten amidst the debris, its cover felt surprisingly warm, almost a pulse beneath her fingertips, as if a forgotten connection was calling to her. The raw terror she felt was profound, but so was the fierce, desperate thought. She had to find a way to fight back. "You got it. We'll pick up right where Act 1 left off, diving straight into the inciting incident that changes everything for Kaelen and Elara. I'll ensure Act 2 builds seamlessly, maintaining all the narrative and emotional requirements we've discussed." The human scream, sharp and desperate, clawed its way through the dense undergrowth, dragging Kaelen from his self-imposed misery. It was the same sound that had haunted him for days, but this time, it was closer. Much closer. Every muscle in his wolf form tensed because a primal instinct, one he thought long dead, surged through him. He moved, a silent black blur through the shadowed forest, drawn by an invisible string. Moments later, he burst into a small clearing, the moonlight slicing through the leaves to illuminate a scene that ripped a guttural snarl from his throat. Elara Vance, the scent of fear and vulnerability clinging to her like a shroud, was cornered against the rough bark of a towering oak. 3 of his most volatile rogue wolves, their human forms twisted by cruelty and desperation, snarled, their faces contorted masks of malice. One, the brute from her porch, had a hand fisted in her hair, yanking her head back while another tore at her simple dress. The third raised a fist, intent on delivering a blow that would surely shatter her fragile frame. In that moment, something inside Kaelen snapped. Not the weary alpha, nor the guilt-ridden failure, but the predator, the protector. His initial apathy shattered, replaced by a sudden, primal, uncharacteristic surge of pure, blinding rage. It wasn't about pack law or duty anymore. It was about the sheer, unadulterated injustice, the brutal assault on the helpless. Without thinking, he launched himself forward. A deafening, terrifying roar ripped from his chest, a sound that shook the very trees, vibrating through the earth. He shifted mid-air, a flash of obsidian fur and muscle, landing as a massive dark wolf between Elara and her tormentors. The ground trembled beneath his paws. The rogue wolves froze, their snarls dying in their throats, replaced by whimpers. He didn't hesitate. One lunged, driven by ingrained defiance, and Kaelen met him with a terrifying display of raw, untamed force. A snap of jaws, a brutal shove with his massive shoulder, sending the wolf sprawling and whimpering into the undergrowth. The others, suddenly reminded of the true power of an alpha, scattered like terrified mice, their shadows vanishing into the deeper forest. Just like that, the clearing fell silent, save for Kaelen's ragged breaths and Elara's soft, trembling sobs. As the silence stretched, Kaelen, still in wolf form, stood over Elara, chest heaving, steam rising from his dark fur. His red eyes, usually clouded with sorrow, were now intensely focused on her, piercing the darkness. She looked up, terror still etched on her face, but a flicker of something else. Disbelief, perhaps, began to bloom in her wide, haunted eyes. And then, The moment their eyes locked, the world seemed to narrow. The mate bond slammed into them both. It wasn't a gentle whisper, it was a physical blow, a jolt of pure, raw recognition that hit Kaelen like a lightning strike, a searing, undeniable truth that overwhelmed him, radiating from her very core and settling deep within his own. His inner wolf roared, a joyous, possessive sound, demanding he claim her, protect her, bury himself in her scent. He instinctively took a step closer, the urge to close the distance overwhelming. Instead, Elara recoiled, a gasp tearing from her throat. She scrambled away from the imposing wolf, a fresh wave of terror washing over her face, turning it into a mask of renewed disbelief. She saw him, not as her savior, but as just another monster, the largest, most terrifying wolf she'd ever seen, with eyes that burned with an unsettling intensity. This can't be real, her mind screamed, because how could this savage beast be connected to her? She pulled her tattered clothing tighter, shrinking against the gnarled roots of the oak tree. The paradox was brutal. The woman his very soul recognized as its other half, the one he was now bound to protect above all else, was terrified of him. On the other hand, Kaelen was utterly consumed by the primal pull, the sweet, intoxicating scent of her, the overwhelming need to claim her, because the mate bond demanded it. This powerful desire conflicted violently with the logical fear of how a human mate, especially one so visibly vulnerable and targeted, would shatter his already fragile authority. A human Luna? It was unheard of, a symbol of weakness to a pack already teetering on the brink of collapse. He fought his wolf's frantic urge to draw closer, forcing himself to shift back into human form, the transformation a painful, jarring experience. As a result, he stood before her, naked, vulnerable, trying to appear less threatening, his broad shoulders hunched, his voice, when it came, a ragged whisper. "Elara," he murmured, her name foreign, yet utterly right, on his tongue. Deep down, she knew the truth, even as her mind rebelled. The sheer power radiating from him, even in human form, was terrifying. Her rejection was visceral. Her mistrust, deeply ingrained from years of torment, screamed at her to flee. She didn't know what scared her more, the possibility that he truly was connected to her, or the certainty that her life was now inextricably linked to this dark, dangerous world she barely understood. His presence was still imposing, a raw, untamed force. Before she could move, Kaelen tried to approach her again, his expression a strange mix of tenderness and desperation. "Elara," he repeated, his voice unfamiliar, laced with a vulnerability she hadn't expected. But she just flinched, shrinking further away, backing herself into the base of the oak tree, pulling her arms tight around herself as if to disappear. The air between them hummed with unspoken words, with the desperate clash of primal urges and ingrained fear. Elara, despite her terror, found a surprising surge of her quiet defiance. Her voice, though trembling, was firm, like a fragile reed refusing to break in a storm. "Stay away from me," she choked out, her gaze fixed on him, because she refused to be a victim. "I want nothing to do with you, or your kind." Her accusation hung in the air, sharp and cutting. "You're just another monster." She might have been saved from his wolves, but he was still one of them. He was their alpha. Rather than cower, she spotted the broken branch she'd used against the smaller wolves. She lunged for it, gripping it tightly, holding it like a desperate weapon between them. The gesture was pathetic, really, a twig against a wolf alpha. Yet it carried an undeniable strength. Kaelen saw it, felt it through the mate bond, her unyielding spirit. It twisted his gut. Because of that, Kaelen, torn, felt her immediate rejection amplify his deepest internal belief of unworthiness. "Of course she sees me as a monster," his inner voice whispered, laced with the self-condemnation he carried like a shroud. "I failed them all. Why would she be any different?" He knew instinctively that forcing the issue now would only deepen her fear and solidify her mistrust. He couldn't risk shattering the fragile, nascent connection that had just sparked between them, even if she couldn't feel it yet beyond fear. He had to be smarter because his protectiveness over her was a desperate, fierce fire that burned through the years of cold regret. With every heartbeat, the mate bond pulled at him, a constant aching demand to close the distance to soothe her terror. But he recognized that his power, his presence, was the very source of that terror. He made the painful decision to retreat, to give her space, even though it felt like tearing off a limb. He couldn't just leave her, not now, not ever. As a result, he backed away slowly, his eyes never leaving her, a silent, pleading question in their depths. He shifted back to his wolf form, melting into the shadows at the edge of the clearing, making sure the rogue wolves weren't foolish enough to return. A silent, watchful presence in the deep forest. That's why Elara, once Kaelen was out of sight, finally collapsed against the oak tree, shaken but alive. Her heart still pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. She glanced at the torn photo album page on the ground, then towards the dark forest where the massive wolf had disappeared. A new kind of dread settled in her stomach, heavy and cold because her life, however she tried to deny it, had just irrevocably changed. Her quiet world was gone, replaced by the terrifying wild unknown. She knew, with chilling certainty, that she was now inextricably linked to this creature, this Alpha, who was both her rescuer and her greatest fear. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something far more ancient, far more terrifying. The chilling dread settled deep in Elara's bones, a constant companion as the days bled into weeks. Her small cottage, once a hopeful sanctuary, now felt like a cage, its flimsy walls offering little protection against the unseen eyes she knew were watching. Because of that, she spent every waking hour reinforcing it, a frantic, almost ritualistic attempt to reclaim a sense of safety. She hammered planks over the grimy windows, the jarring echoes a stark contrast to the quiet hum of the blackwood forest outside. She dragged heavy furniture against the flimsy door, creating a makeshift barricade. Every creak of the house, every rustle in the leaves outside, made her jump, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Meanwhile, Kaelen was a constant, silent presence, a phantom guardian in the deepening shadows of the forest. He watched her from afar, his wolf form a dark silhouette among the ancient trees. His heart ached with the mate bond's relentless pull, a dull physical throb that mirrored the palpable fear radiating from her. He saw her struggles, the way she flinched at every shadow, the exhaustion etched on her face, and fought the overwhelming urge to intervene, to step out of the darkness and offer comfort. Yet, he knew his appearance would only send her spiraling back into terror. He was the monster, even if he was her monster. Still, his protective instincts burned, hot and fierce. He stalked the edges of his territory, a relentless sentinel, intercepting any rogue wolves foolish enough to attempt to approach her cottage. He would appear suddenly, a dark, menacing growl ripping from his throat, dispersing them with silent, brutal efficiency. Just like that, his own pack members scattered, their insolence replaced by terrified submission, because they still remembered what a true Alpha's fury felt like. Kaelen was protecting Elara from them, the very wolves he was supposed to lead. And the irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. His days were a constant battle between duty and desire, a desperate dance in the shadows. He longed to tell her that she wasn't alone, that he was here, but the words felt hollow when his very existence was the source of her torment. As a result, Elara remained oblivious to her silent protector, consumed by the gnawing fear and the immense solitude of her new existence. The constant ache of longing and frustration for Kaelen, mixed with fierce protectiveness and renewed guilt over his pack's actions, was a heavy burden. She couldn't see the silent war he waged on her behalf. One afternoon, while patching a particularly large hole in the cottage wall, Elara's fingers brushed against something cold and hard behind the crumbling plaster. What followed was the discovery of a hidden alcove barely visible. Inside, nestled in the dust, lay a small, aged wooden box. Her heart skipped a beat. A real secret, perhaps. She pulled it out, the wood warm beneath her trembling fingers, as if it held a faint, lingering energy. Upon opening it, she found a collection of dried herbs, brittle with age but still fragrant, their scents strangely comforting. Beneath them, a small, intricate carving of a wolf, its eyes wide and ancient, peered up at her. And then, there was another journal, much older, its leather cover more worn, its pages filled with the same cryptic symbols as the first. This wasn't just a journal. It was the journal, the companion to the one she'd inherited. In that moment, a strange sense of connection, almost a whisper from the past, brushed against her soul. She carefully tried to decipher a few phrases, her brow furrowing in concentration. She recognized what looked like a rudimentary map of the Blackwood territory, dotted with strange markers, symbols that seemed to pulse with forgotten meaning. Was this some kind of family history? A key? But then, a sharp snap of a twig outside made her jump, sending a shiver of pure dread down her spine. Her head snapped up, eyes darting to the window. Through a gap in the threadbare curtains, she glimpsed a shadowy figure lurking at the edge of the tree line. It was too far to clearly see, but the low, hunched posture and the lingering sense of malice sent a cold wave through her. Was it one of them? A rogue wolf, perhaps even Rhys, Kaelen's cruel lieutenant. He was clearly observing her, a silent, predatory watch. That's why she quickly snatched the box, stuffing it deep under a loose floorboard. Her fleeting curiosity about her ancestors was replaced by renewed paranoia and a crushing sense of vulnerability. She was being watched. Always. The knowledge clung to her, a suffocating blanket. The forest, once merely distant and mysterious, now felt actively hostile, because she was trapped in its watchful gaze. The relentless fear and the lack of fresh, clean water finally forced Elara out. Her well had run dry days ago, and her bottled supply was dwindling. So, with a desperate sigh, she ventured towards the small stream she'd heard murmuring deeper in the forest, hoping to avoid any unpleasant encounters. The air was cool beneath the dense canopy, carrying the earthy scent of damp leaves and ancient moss. She clutched her empty bucket, every nerve on edge. However, as she knelt by the stream, dipping her bucket into the clear water, a shadow fell over her. Her blood ran cold. She spun around, bucket clattering. Standing over her were three figures, their grins cruel, their eyes glinting with malicious amusement. Rhys, Kaelen's ambitious and resentful lieutenant, was among them. His scent, even in human form, was rank with menace. "Well, well," Rhys drawled, his voice a low sneer. "Look what the Alpha's found. A pretty little pet, isn't she?" He had heard whispers, no doubt, rumors of Kaelen's strange behavior near the human's cottage, his sudden, uncharacteristic intervention. "Heard you're quite the distraction," Rhys continued, stepping closer, his companions fanning out behind him. "Making our Alpha soft." He accused her of being a human threat, a witch who had corrupted their leader, a symbol of Kaelen's weakness. He mocked Kaelen's inaction, his supposed abandonment of pack law. Despite that, a spark, hot and furious, ignited in Elara. She was tired of being a victim. Her hand shot out, splashing cold stream water directly into Rhys's sneering face. "Leave me alone," she cried, her voice trembling but firm, because she wouldn't cower. Rhys roared, enraged, lunging forward. But then a blur of motion from the trees, and Kaelen was there. He burst from the dense foliage like a force of nature, his face grim, eyes blazing with an almost otherworldly light. He had followed Elara, his intuition screaming danger. He physically threw one wolf aside with a single brutal shove, sending him sprawling into the mud. Without another word, Kaelen stood directly between Rhys and Elara, a silent, powerful challenge emanating from every inch of his being. His presence was a stark wall of fury and desperate resolve. Rhys snarled, his eyes narrowing at Kaelen's blatant intervention. "Still protecting your pet, Alpha?" he sneered, a venomous challenge in his voice. "What does that say about you?" Kaelen didn't answer, his gaze fixed on Rhys, a silent warning in his burning eyes. The air crackled with unspoken threats. Elara, caught between them, felt a complex mix of terror, a flicker of surprised relief at Kaelen's presence, and a frustrating, sustained mistrust. This was the first direct confrontation, and the stakes, she realized with a sinking heart, had just been raised far beyond her comprehension. Kaelen stood in the crumbling heart of his pack compound, the remnants of the old Alpha's den, attempting to project an authority he no longer truly felt. A few loyalists, their faces etched with weariness, and some of the more neutral wolves, their expressions unreadable, shifted uneasily before him. He tried to outline a plan, a desperate plea for unity to rebuild their dwindling resources, but his words felt hollow even to his own ears. He spoke of restoring order, of protecting their territory, yet the silence that followed was heavy with skepticism. Instead, Rhys, ever the viper, stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "Rebuild?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with venom, and he openly questioned Kaelen's sanity. "With a human in our territory? An Alpha distracted by a pet?" His words, sharp as daggers, cut through Kaelen's already fragile resolve. The rogue faction murmured in agreement, spreading rumors like a disease, whispers of Kaelen's human obsession, his weak leadership. They were convinced he'd been corrupted, because why else would he shield a human? As a result, Kaelen felt his authority slipping further away, the ground beneath his feet crumbling like the ancient stones around them. Because of that, Rhys and his cronies continued their insidious campaign, their harassment of Elara intensifying. They didn't always confront her directly. Sometimes Elara would find the grim gifts on her porch, a freshly killed rabbit, its throat slit, or the dismembered wing of a bird, grotesque symbols of what they could do. Other times she'd wake to crude, threatening symbols smeared on her door with mud or animal blood. Each time, Kaelen, alerted by the subtle pull of the bond or the frightened whispers of his loyal few, would intervene covertly, silently cleaning the defilement, his jaw tight with suppressed rage. Still, these actions, however hidden, only solidified the pack's suspicion of his attachment to her, because his constant disappearances to her cottage did not go unnoticed. He was increasingly frustrated, desperate, caught between a pack that rejected him and a mate who feared him. He looked out at the darkening forest surrounding Elara's cottage, a desperate sense of isolation washing over him. It seemed the entire world was conspiring against him. The sky wept. Rain lashed against Elara's dilapidated cottage, a relentless drumming that matched the feverish pounding in her head. She shivered, her body racked by chills despite being wrapped in every blanket she owned. A sudden, violent storm had rolled in, trapping her, and to make things worse, the lingering fear and constant stress had finally broken her. She was burning up, her limbs heavy, her throat raw. She knew she was alone, truly alone, and the knowledge was a cold, suffocating weight. Meanwhile, Kaelen, miles away in the damp, decaying Alpha den, felt the mate bond thrumming with an alarming intensity. It was distress, sharp and undeniable, radiating from Elara. Panic, cold and raw, gripped him. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. His protective instinct, now fully awake, overrode all else. He shifted, a black streak against the storm-swept landscape, driven by an urgency that drowned out all logical fear. Just like that, he burst through the tree line near her cottage, saw the flickering light from her window, and knew. He approached openly, abandoning all pretense of secrecy. He found her crumpled on the floor, weak and feverish, her eyes glazed. Despite her protests, weak murmurs of "go away, monster," his tenderness was absolute. He carefully tended to her, his large, scarred hand surprisingly gentle as he wiped her brow with a cool cloth. He foraged quickly in the storm-battered woods for specific herbs, chewing them into a paste to bring down her fever, the ancient knowledge of his ancestors guiding him. He rekindled the dying fire, coaxing warmth from the damp wood, and shared what meager warmth he had, hunkering close but not touching her. His presence was undeniably comforting, a solid anchor in her delirium. In a moment of semi-conscious rambling, Elara murmured about her fear of being alone, her voice barely a whisper, a poignant echo of Kaelen's own fear of being the last of his kind. In that moment, witnessing her fragile vulnerability, feeling the primal need to nurture her, a crucial realization slammed into Kaelen. His failures didn't define his capacity to protect. His perceived weakness, his compassion, his desperate need to save rather than just destroy, could actually be his greatest strength. He wasn't destined to ruin everything. He was destined to save. Elara, even in her delirium, felt a strange sense of safety she hadn't known in years. The rigid walls of her mistrust began to crack, ever so slightly, because his quiet, unwavering care spoke louder than any words or snarls. Kaelen stayed with her until the fever finally broke, his hand hovering over her forehead, before he reluctantly retreated, leaving her with fresh water and a strange, dawning gratitude in her heart. This was the turning point, a fragile bridge built on shared vulnerability. The next day, a renewed sense of purpose hardened Kaelen's jaw. The midpoint shift had ignited a new fire within him. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was fighting for a future. For Elara. For the pack he still believed in. As a result, he ventured further than usual, his senses keen, actively hunting for the pack. But the hunt took an ominous turn. He discovered clear, unmistakable signs of an encroaching rival pack, scent markings, alien and aggressive on ancient trees, snapped branches, thicker and more deliberate than any of his own wolves would make, and strange, elongated claw marks gouged into the earth. This wasn't just a border dispute, it was a declaration. Meanwhile, back at the Blackwood compound, Rhys, fueled by Kaelen's visible concern for Elara, saw his chance. He had watched Kaelen tend to the human, seen the tender care in his eyes, and it solidified his conviction. Their alpha was weak, corrupted. That's why Rhys gathered a larger group of dissidents, desperate, power-hungry wolves who believed brute force was the only way to reclaim their glory. He openly questioned Kaelen's sanity, sneering that he'd been bewitched by the human, that she was a curse on their pack. They made a unanimous decision to take matters into their own hands, initiating a more direct and brutal threat against Elara. They would force Kaelen's hand, prove his weakness, and crush the human once and for all. Consequently, the air thickened with unspoken violence. Kaelen, standing over the undeniable rival pack's markings, felt a chilling dread curl in his gut. An external war was brewing, and his pack was fractured from within. He heard a chilling, distant howl, not from his own, but a deep, resonant declaration of challenge from the encroaching rivals, a sound that promised war. He knew then that the threats were no longer isolated incidents. They were converging. He had to act, and he had to unite his people, because the danger was now imminent and unavoidable. There was no going back. His pack and the woman he was bound to were caught in a tightening vice. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence heavier than any rain. Kaelen knew he couldn't hide in the shadows any longer, not from his pack, and certainly not from Elara. Because of that, with a heart pounding against his ribs, he approached her cottage openly, his footsteps crunching on the damp earth. He found her on the porch, carefully mending a tear in her simple dress, her brow furrowed in concentration. The sight of her, so fragile yet so resilient, twisted something in his chest. "Elara," he began, his voice rough, betraying the vulnerability he rarely showed. She flinched, her needle dropping, her eyes wide with that familiar flicker of fear. He took a slow, deliberate step closer. "The forest, it's not safe. Not just from my wolves anymore. There's another pack, stronger. They're coming." He didn't ask for her trust, not yet. He couldn't. Instead, he explained briefly, The mate bond, the undeniable truth that tied them together, and the grave danger she was now in simply by being near him. He saw the doubt, the terror in her eyes, but also a flicker of understanding. Still he pressed on, his voice a desperate, heartfelt vow. "I swear, Elara, I will protect you from them." He gestured vaguely to the surrounding woods. "From my pack, even if it means sacrificing everything." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with sincerity. He saw her jaw clench, her gaze searching his, looking for the monster. But she also remembered his quiet care during her illness, the warmth he'd brought when she was shivering alone. The rigid walls of her mistrust, so carefully built, began to waver. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was just the sheer desperation in his eyes. But a flicker of acceptance, hesitant and fragile, bloomed within her. She finally allowed him into her home, the tiny cottage suddenly feeling too small for the raw intensity between them. "The wolves," she whispered, her voice barely audible, gesturing to the journal she still kept hidden. "What do these symbols mean?" Kaelen's gaze followed her finger to a cryptic drawing in her journal, a flicker of recognition passing through his eyes because he knew some of those markings from ancient Blackwood lore. This was a critical point of trust building, a tentative step towards a shared future. The humid air in the ruined pack compound crackled with tension. Rhys, bloated with his own arrogance and the conviction that Kaelen had abandoned them for a human, had seized his moment. Because of that, he stood on a precarious pile of rubble, his voice booming with false authority, staging a public challenge to Kaelen's alpha status. "He's weak," Rhys bellowed, gesturing wildly towards the empty space where Kaelen should have been. "Corrupted by human softness, this human witch has bewitched him." He openly declared Kaelen unfit to lead, and worse, began to discuss Elara's execution, drawing nods and growls from the desperate, misguided wolves gathered before him. But then, a ripple went through the crowd. Kaelen appeared, emerging from the shadowed tree line, his presence a stark, powerful counterpoint to Rhys's bluster. And beside him, surprisingly firm despite her obvious fear, was Elara. Her chin was high, her eyes fixed on Rhys even as her hands trembled. Kaelen confronted Rhys, his voice resonating with a newfound authority, a low rumble that vibrated through the ground. "She is my mate," he stated, his gaze unwavering as he looked at his stunned pack. "And she is your Luna, an undeniable part of this pack." The declaration hung heavy, defying centuries of tradition. Rhys roared, enraged, and just like that, the fragile peace shattered. What followed was an open, brutal brawl. Kaelen, now fully embodying a true alpha, fought with a fierce determination, his movements precise and powerful. His few loyalists, inspired by his unwavering resolve and Elara's courage, plunged into the fray. Elara, witnessing the chaos, felt a surge of adrenaline. As two rogue wolves cornered Kaelen, forcing him back, her mind raced. She remembered a phrase from the ancient journal, a detail about the compound's foundations, a subtle weakness in the terrain. Without thinking, she cried out, pointing to a crumbling wall. "The old well, under the west wall." Her voice, though small, carried an unexpected authority. One of Kaelen's loyalists, startled but trusting, followed her gaze, striking the wall. The ground buckled, creating a diversion that scattered the attacking wolves. This unexpected aid turned the tide, because her hidden knowledge had for the first time directly aided Kaelen's loyalists. The battle ended with Rhys retreating, a furious snarl on his lips, but not without a dark promise to return with the rival pack at his side, revealing his ultimate betrayal. The air was thick with the scent of blood and damp earth. In the immediate aftermath, Kaelen's loyalists, bruised and panting, stared at Elara with new eyes. They'd seen her courage, her unexpected contribution. They'd witnessed Kaelen's fierce protection. As a result, grudging acceptance began to replace suspicion in their gazes. Kaelen and Elara, exhausted but resolute, returned to her cottage, the silence between them now one of shared understanding, not just fear. They pored over Elara's ancient journals, the flickering lamplight casting long, dancing shadows on the cryptic pages. They discovered not only ancient healing remedies, but more importantly, strategic information about the territory's hidden paths, secret tunnels, and weaknesses in the old pack defenses. Elara's ancestors, it seemed, had been keepers of this land's forgotten lore. There was even a fragmented prophecy, a warning about a great threat that would rise from the north, seeking to claim a power hidden within the Blackwood lands, which meant the external threat, the rival pack, now potentially aided by Rhys's bitter betrayal, was far more imminent and dangerous than they had thought. Therefore, a desperate, fragile plan began to form between them. Kaelen, his face grim, pointed to a crude map Elara had drawn from the journal. "These tunnels, they lead beneath their camp," he murmured, his finger tracing a faint line. "We can use them." Elara nodded, her fear still present, but now tempered by a fierce determination. Their combined goal, to unite the remaining loyal wolves, prepare for the incoming invasion, and protect the ancient secret Elara was uncovering. The bond between Kaelen and Elara was no longer just a burden. It was a conduit, a source of shared strength. As the wind shifted, carrying the faint predatory scent of the approaching rival pack, Kaelen looked at Elara. A silent acknowledgement passed between them of her unexpected vital role. He placed his hand over hers on the map, a gesture of profound trust and growing interdependence. Their future, and the future of the Blackwood pack, hinged on this desperate, shadow-forged alliance. Let's dive into Act 6, the darkest part of the story. This is where Kaelen faces his greatest losses and hits his lowest point, while Elara confronts extreme danger. We'll ensure it flows directly from the precarious alliance forged in Act 5, deepening their internal struggles and making the external threat truly devastating. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and unspoken dread as Kaelen led his diminished pack. Their steps were quiet, precise, a small, desperate force moving through the ancient shadowed paths Elara's journal had revealed. Still, a gnawing sense of unease settled in Kaelen's gut, a cold premonition that tightened his chest, because something felt wrong. They were supposed to be setting up defenses, preparing for the rival pack's invasion. But then, a guttural war cry ripped through the silence, echoing from all directions. Chaos erupted. It was an ambush, swift and brutal. Rhys, knowing Kaelen's tactics, knowing his reliance on the old ways, had betrayed him, leading the rival pack in a devastating surprise attack. Just like that, arrows tipped with wolfsbane rained down from the trees, followed by the terrifying charge of the rival Alpha's warriors. Kaelen roared, shifting instantly, a massive black wolf tearing into the enemy ranks. He fought with a desperate ferocity, a blur of teeth and claws, but the numbers were overwhelming. He watched, horrified, as several loyal Blackwood wolves, brave souls who had finally put their faith in him, fell, gravely injured or killed. The chilling return of his past trauma clawed at him because he was seeing his pack decimated once more. In the midst of the chaos, Elara, attempting to use her knowledge of the territory's hidden paths to create an escape route or diversion, found herself separated. She cried out Kaelen's name, her voice thin against the din of battle. A sickening sense of dread washed over her. Her small diversion had failed. Moments later, a shadow fell over her. Rhys. His eyes gleamed with triumphant malice. He'd anticipated her move because he knew Kaelen would rely on her human tricks. He cornered her, his sneer wide. Kaelen, battered and bleeding, fought desperately to reach her, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He saw Elara trapped, her face pale with terror. As a result, the sickening realization hit him. He couldn't save her. He was failing again. Kaelen roared, a sound of pure agony and desperate fury, trying to tear through the wall of enemy wolves that swarmed him. His gaze was locked on Elara, on Rhys's cruel grip tightening on her arm. However, before he could take another step, he was intercepted by the rival Alpha, a brute even larger than Kaelen who slammed into him with bone-jarring force. The world spun. Rhys, a twisted smile on his face, openly mocked Kaelen, his words reaching Kaelen even through the haze of pain. "Your little human weakness, Alpha, paraded for all to see." He tied Elara's wrists roughly with a thick rope, then dragged her away, her terrified pleas tearing through Kaelen's soul. Not only that, Rhys's cruel laughter echoed through the forest as he pulled Elara deeper into the enemy lines, promising to parade her as Kaelen's human weakness before finishing off the Blackwood pack. Kaelen fought, clawed, bit, but it was useless. He was held back, overwhelmed by sheer numbers, watching as the woman he was bound to, the one he swore to protect, was dragged away, her muffled cries fading with the distance. The mate bond screamed in his head, a searing pain, amplified by his utter powerlessness. Because of that, the despair, cold and vast, settled over him, suffocating. He collapsed, watching Elara being taken, the mate bond's distress amplified by his inability to move. In the quiet that followed the sounds of the retreating rival pack, Kaelen was left battered and alone. The forest floor was littered with the wounded and the dead of his loyal pack members. He looked at them, their still forms, and the profound, crushing belief that he had indeed destroyed everything he loved washed over him. His deepest fear, confirmed. He was a curse. He could hear the faint, pained whimpers of his few remaining loyalists, a stark reminder of his failure. Their eyes, dull with pain, seemed to mirror his own crushing guilt. This was it. His failures had caught up to him. His attempt at redemption had only brought more destruction. He was utterly broken, his body and spirit shattered. The moon, full and indifferent, stared down through the broken canopy of the ruined Blackwood Pack compound. Kaelen, severely wounded both physically and mentally, dragged himself back through the devastation. The stench of blood and defeat clung to the very air. He saw the silent, judging eyes of his few remaining loyalists, their faces gaunt, their hope extinguished. He offered no words, because what was there to say? He slumped amidst the rubble of what was once his alpha den, now just a painful reminder of his failed reign. He stared up at the indifferent moon, its light mocking his despair. Visions tormented him, the faces of his fallen pack members from years ago, now merging with the faces of the loyal wolves he'd just led to slaughter. And then, Elara, her terrified face, her silent scream as Rhys dragged her away. The mate bond, once a source of burgeoning hope, now felt like a raw, festering wound, a constant reminder of his failure to protect her. He believed he truly was a curse, that his protective instinct only led to destruction. He was a monster, just as Elara had once called him. Maybe Rhys was right. Maybe he was unworthy. In the stillness that followed, the profound grief was a physical weight, pressing him into the cold earth. He considered giving up, just letting the pack die, letting himself die. Truth be told, he was convinced he wasn't worthy of being an alpha, unworthy of Elara's love, unworthy of anything but the crushing weight of his failures. This was his internal crucible, a brutal battle against his own self-condemnation, a descent into utter despair. The goal, saving his pack and winning Elara, seemed impossible, an illusion he had foolishly chased. His core internal flaw, his deep-seated belief that his failures defined him, consumed him entirely. As the last glimmer of moonlight faded, casting the compound into deeper shadows, Kaelen's eyes fell upon an almost invisible carving on a shattered piece of wall. A crude drawing, perhaps made by a forgotten pack member years ago, of a strong wolf with a human woman standing proudly by its side. It was barely there, a faint etching on crumbling stone, yet it caught his gaze. He stared at it, the image piercing through his despair, a ghostly whisper from a time when such a bond might have been a symbol of strength, not weakness. What did it mean? Was it a prophecy, or merely a cruel reminder of what could never be? This lingering question, a tiny flicker of curiosity in the vast darkness of his despair, remained unanswered, An open loop waiting for resolution. The cold, damp stone of the rival pack's stronghold bit into Elara's skin, but the fear that had consumed her slowly gave way to a simmering defiance. She was battered, bruised, but unbroken. Her eyes, sharper now, scanned the rough-hewn walls of her crude cell. She noticed intricate carvings, symbols she dimly recognized from her inherited journal, etched into the stone. As a result, she began to covertly examine them, rubbing away layers of grime, her fingers tracing the ancient lines. What followed was a chilling revelation. The rival Alpha wasn't just seeking territory. He was after a powerful ancient artifact, a secret power hidden deep within the Blackwood lands, a secret her ancestors, and perhaps Kaelen's own, had guarded for centuries. She realized with a jolt that the rival Alpha's methods were brutal and destructive, mirroring the rogue wolf's actions, but magnified 1,000 times. He would obliterate everything. She knew then she had to fight. Meanwhile, back in the desolation of the Blackwood compound, Kaelen still sat amidst the rubble, staring at the faint carving on the wall. The image of the strong wolf and the human woman was a ghost, a whisper of a forgotten truth. His despair was a heavy cloak, but the carving, so out of place in the destruction, pricked at him. But then, a grizzled elder, one of the few survivors from the ambush, hobbled towards him. His face was a roadmap of sorrow, but his eyes held an ancient wisdom. He didn't preach. He simply sat beside Kaelen, quietly reminding him of his father's words Kaelen had long forgotten. A true Alpha protects, not just with teeth but with heart. The elder spoke of an old tale, a legend of a human Luna, who long ago had once saved a pack from utter ruin, her unique gifts guiding them through darkness. Still, the image of Elara, taken, tormented, burned in Kaelen's mind. The faint, persistent pull of the mate bond, though painful, shifted, becoming a spark of desperate determination. He couldn't let Elara suffer because of his own perceived weakness. He wouldn't. Just like that, he wouldn't let his own fear of worthlessness doom them all. Consequently, Kaelen slowly rose, his eyes no longer clouded with despair, but hard with a renewed, fierce purpose. His internal battle was far from over, but the fire had returned. He gathered his remaining loyalists, a handful of battered, disillusioned wolves. His voice, though low, resonated with a newfound authority, an undeniable Alpha's command. "We go for Elara," he stated, his gaze sweeping over them, igniting a flicker of hope in their own tired eyes. "And we reclaim what's ours." Hours later, Elara, battered but unbroken, found a tiny, almost invisible crack in her cell wall. Through this opening, she spotted a loose stone. Using a hidden hairpin, a small, forgotten keepsake from her old life, she meticulously worked it free. Behind it, a hidden piece of her journal, a single folded page she'd ripped out before her capture, lay concealed. This wasn't just paper. It was a fragment of the ancient map, revealing a precise location for the rival Alpha's hidden power source, the artifact, perhaps even the prophecy's key. Immediately, she realized that if she could destabilize that, she might create the diversion Kaelen needed, the one she'd planned for earlier, but now on a grander scale. Meanwhile, Kaelen, now fully embodying a true Alpha, not just by title, but by unwavering resolve, studied Elara's crude map. Her historical knowledge from the journal, which he could now intuitively understand through the mate bond, was proving invaluable. He could almost feel the ancient tunnels, the forgotten paths beneath his paws. He began to form a daring, desperate rescue mission. "The old hunter's trail," he muttered, tracing a faint line with his claw, "leads directly to their blind spot." He outlined his plan to his loyalists, his voice clear and unwavering, describing a surprise attack that would hit the rival pack where they were weakest. He appealed not to their fear but to their shared history, their pride, the hope of a true future for the Blackwood pack. He spoke of Elara, his Luna, not as a human weakness, but as their strength, because her ancient lineage held the key to their survival. Therefore, a sense of purpose, fragile but growing, bound them together. Their combined goal, to execute the rescue, reclaim their future, and protect what was left of their home. Their emotional state was one of focused intensity and desperate hope. Every wolf looked at Kaelen with renewed respect, a genuine belief in his leadership. Elara, miles away but connected by an invisible thread, worked tirelessly within her cell, her movements precise, subtle, preparing her part in the grand, desperate scheme. Soon after, Kaelen led his small, determined band into the hidden depths of the Blackwood Forest, towards the rival pack's stronghold, the air thick with tension because destiny awaited them. The ancient tunnels, narrow and suffocating, were a testament to Elara's ancestral knowledge. Kaelen, leading his loyalists through the suffocating darkness, felt the mate bond thrumming, a strange, intuitive guide that pulsed stronger the closer they got to Elara. As a result, they emerged from a concealed opening deep within the rival pack's territory, shrouded by the cover of a moonless night. The air tasted of pine needles and damp earth, but also of raw, untamed wolf and the bitter tang of ambition. They saw her, Elara, still a captive but defiant. She was near the rival Alpha, who was surrounded by his inner circle, preparing a final, brutal act of dominance against the Blackwood territory, a dark ritual perhaps to absorb its power. Rhys was there too, a cruel grin on his face, mocking Elara, his words like barbs. Because of that, Kaelen's blood ran cold. Elara, despite her terror, was bravely attempting to undermine the rival Alpha's plans. Her subtle movements meant to disorient him. She even tried to contact Kaelen through the mate bond, a faint, desperate mental plea, a whisper of urgency in his mind. Still, Kaelen remained hidden, positioning his loyalists. His heart ached for Elara, but his mind was clear, focused. This was it. Every decision, every sacrifice, every moment of despair had led to this. The emotional stakes were at their peak. He saw Elara, her eyes filled with fear but also a fierce, unyielding defiance. And then, he met the cold, calculating gaze of the rival Alpha, whose eyes held pure, unadulterated malice. The signal, a low, guttural growl from Kaelen, finally broke the agonizing tension. Just like that, the point of direct confrontation was imminent, the destiny of the Blackwood pack hanging in the balance. Got it. This is it. The climax and resolution. We'll bring Kaelen and Elara's journey to a powerful conclusion, ensuring Act 8 flows directly from the tense infiltration of Act 7, delivering on all the emotional, narrative, and formatting requirements. A primal roar ripped through the night as Kaelen launched himself forward. The signal given, his small band of loyalists erupted from their hidden positions, a wave of desperate fury crashing into the unsuspecting rival pack. Chaos exploded. Fangs clashed with steel, snarls mingled with shouts, and the air thickened with the scent of blood and ozone. Kaelen, a dark, unstoppable force, moved with a grace born of battle and desperate love. He channeled his strength, but more importantly, a newfound compassion. He fought not just to destroy but to protect. He locked onto Rhys, his former lieutenant, who was sneering at Elara, a blade pressed to her throat. Because of that, Kaelen's fury reached a boiling point. He slammed into Rhys, a brutal, no-holds-barred confrontation, each blow fueled by betrayal and the burning need for justice. Rhys was cunning, desperate, but Kaelen was relentless. Meanwhile, the rival Alpha, a towering brute, moved towards Elara, intent on claiming the ancient power. Just like that, as the rival Alpha's shadow fell over Elara, a desperate tremor ran through the mate bond, jolting Kaelen. He roared a warning, but he was still locked with Rhys. In that critical moment, a primal, ancient energy pulsed from the earth beneath Elara. Her eyes snapped open, blazing with a light that was not quite human. The symbols from her journal, the cryptic map, the dried herbs. It all clicked. Her latent power awakened fully. A blast of pure, ancient energy erupted from her, a wave of psychic force that disoriented the rival Alpha, sending him stumbling back with a cry of pain. She then pointed, her voice ringing with newfound authority, to a hidden fissure in the stone floor. "There! His power!" she cried, revealing the rival Alpha's hidden weakness. Kaelen, seeing her power, feeling her strength resonate through the mate bond, was fueled anew. He delivered a crushing blow to Reese, sending him sprawling, incapacitated but alive, a broken mirror of the path Kaelen himself had avoided. Then, with a final, earth-shattering leap, Kaelen engaged the rival Alpha. He fought with every ounce of his being, drawing on Elara's wisdom, using the rival's greed against him. With a final, triumphant roar that echoed through the entire forest, a sound of pure alpha dominance mixed with compassion, Kaelen defeated the rival, shattering his hold on the ancient power. The conflict was resolved, his transformation complete. He had proven, undeniably, that he could protect what he loved, not by destroying but by embracing his true nature. The dust settled, the echoes of battle fading into the heavy silence. The rival pack, broken and leaderless, fled into the night, their threat nullified. Kaelen, bruised but triumphant, turned instantly to Elara. He pulled her into his arms, a fierce, possessive embrace that was both protective and tender. The mate bond, no longer a source of pain, now radiated warmth and fierce joy, a symphony of relief and unspoken love. Soon after, his remaining loyalists, weary but victorious, gathered around them. Their eyes, once filled with suspicion, now held awe and respect for Elara. They had witnessed her courage, her unexpected power, and Kaelen's fierce, unwavering protection. Kaelen, his voice still hoarse from battle, publicly declared Elara as his Luna. "She is not just my mate by bond," he announced, his gaze sweeping over his pack, "but by right of her strength, her wisdom, and her unwavering courage. She is Luna." A ripple of murmurs, then a rising tide of acceptance swept through the wolves. The wounded were tended to with a shared purpose, and the fallen were honored with solemn, silent vows. Then, Kaelen addressed the surviving Blackwood wolves, not with threats or demands, but with a promise of a new path. "We will rebuild," he stated, his voice resonating with a quiet power. "Not through fear, but through unity. Not by preying on the weak, but by protecting all who dwell in these lands." Elara, now more confident, looked at the wolves with a mix of awe and burgeoning understanding, no longer pure fear. The theme of found family began to solidify, a fragile seed planted in the fertile ground of their victory. As Kaelen and Elara stood together, their hands found each other, her fingers gently tracing the familiar scar on his arm, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey. Months later, the Blackwood Pack compound was no longer a shadow of its former self. It thrummed with a quiet energy, a hum of rebuilding and renewal. It was still rugged, wild, but there was an undeniable sense of purpose. New dens were being carved from the earth, the ruined hall slowly being restoned. Humans from the nearby isolated town were no longer prey. Instead, a cautious, tentative coexistence had begun to blossom, perhaps through established trade routes for goods or agreed-upon boundaries for hunting and foraging. Kaelen, a true alpha in every sense, led with both formidable strength and profound compassion. He no longer made decisions in isolation. He consulted with Elara, whose unique knowledge of the ancient lore and the land itself helped bridge the gap between their worlds, guiding the pack towards sustainable practices and deeper understanding. Their bond was a fierce, unwavering beacon, a testament to what could be forged in fire and defiance. They were often seen together, quiet moments stolen amidst the daily rhythm of pack life. One evening, they stood at the edge of a newly cleared meadow, looking out over the flourishing forest, the moonlight bathing everything in a soft, silvery glow. They spoke of the pack's future, of expanding their territory with peace, not conquest. Kaelen's initial flaw, his belief in his unworthiness, had been utterly transformed into the unwavering conviction that he was worthy of leading, worthy of loving, and worthy of building a new legacy. Elara, once a bullied orphan, was now the respected Luna, her spirit unyielding, her place undeniable. Their combined goal, to build a harmonious future, one where humans and wolves might finally coexist. Their emotional state, peace, contentment, deep love, and a quiet, profound optimism for the new dawn. The carving on the wall, the one Kaelen had stared at in his darkest hour, was now displayed prominently, not as a reminder of failure, but of their redemption, a symbol of the unexpected strength found in their human Luna. Epilogue. Years later, the Blackwood Pack compound thrived. Pups, their fur gleaming under the sun, wrestled playfully in the old training grounds, now vibrant and alive. Elara, her laugh bright and free, taught young wolves about the forest's hidden lore, about the plants that healed and the paths that offered safe passage. Kaelen, his presence a calm, powerful anchor, trained his warriors not just for battle, but to protect all inhabitants of their vast territory. Peace, hard-won and deeply cherished, settled over the lands. Their own pups, a wild, beautiful blend of human and wolf, ran through the meadow, their laughter echoing the hope of a world where ancient traditions embraced new possibilities, where love transcended prejudice. It was a legacy built on courage, compassion, and the fierce, unwavering bond forged between a struggling alpha and his bullied mate.